Oh man, I love that island music. You know what? It's a little bit of strong island music. I love the kind of reggae vibes and stuff like that, man. It makes me chill out. Dr. Jeffrey Reynolds, Family and Children's Association, Long Island ChangeMakers. And you know what? When you name a show Long Island ChangeMakers, automatically anybody who comes on the show is a Long Island ChangeMaker. I don't have a bust of you. I don't have a trophy to give you, but you are a Long Island.
Was there a big criteria?
Yeah,
you know, judges.
There was. I mean, Tommy D was there. That's pretty much it. Yeah. But we had a good conversation, he and I, and we decided that these are the Long Island ChangeMakers. Yeah, and I wanted you here because, listen, like I was saying to you earlier, I see you in the newspaper. Certainly, you know, I know you've been on News 12 and other publications, other things, and what I always see you do too is. And I get a kick out of this because those of us who understand the importance of the nonprofit sector realize that the commitment is from the bottom to the top and the top to the bottom and all the way in between these organizations, right? And I meet with folks like yourself who always say, you know what, Tommy D, Family and Children's Association, we got a great organization, but most of all, it's our people, and it's the people we serve, right? And I feel like whether I'm talking to Neela or Yolanda or Robert Budd or yourself, it's always about the people. And that's what I love about this sector, where in other parts of the world, sometimes it's like the ego of like Vito, the very important top officer, is like, all about me, baby. But it's not, I don't see that in our sector. So I do see you as a change maker, and I see you posting things on a Sunday morning, on a Saturday evening. We just got back from here. Or we're just going over there, or we got the run walk, or I'm in Eisenhower Park, or I'm in Heckscher State. All these different things on our island. So when I think of Long Island ChangeMakers, you're right there as one of those people. So
I appreciate it.
I appreciate you, man. Thanks for what you do. Thanks for what you do for our sector. Thanks for what you do for our island. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I feel blessed to be able to do it.
Yeah.
And, you know, while I'm sitting here shooting a TV show with you, there were 360 FCA staff that are working their butts off to get people into housing, to provide counseling services, to help our seniors, and just they do that day in and day out. Tonight while I'm asleep, some kid will knock on the door in Nassau Haven and say, "Could I stay here tonight?" And our staff will be there with open arms, ready to accept that kid in. And so I really give them all the props. And I also, you know, it's not lost on me that the organization's been around 140 years. Yeah. So I've been there 10.
That's like, I don't want to say, I use that word unbelievable a lot, but it's not a really good word because it is believable because it's true that you've been there the organization's been 140 years. The thing about that, though, is that is not typical. From a sustainability perspective, you know, nothing. It's
tough,
right? So
it's tough. But I'll tell you, in this case, and in life, the test becomes the testament.
The test becomes the testament.
And when I think about the current environment now, which is very, very challenging for not-for-profits, I always fall back on FCA made it for 140 years. We made it through the Spanish flu pandemic. Right, which gave me hope during COVID.
Sure.
We made it through a couple world wars. We made it through 9/11, the Great Depression, a few recessions, the Wall Street market crash, COVID, and now we've got some chaos in Washington. It puts it all in perspective and says, all right, so like if we did this for 140 years, we'll get through this too.
Yeah, I like that. I like that vision, and certainly with that long experience, you can say, all right, this is something we got to deal with. It's not a joke. It's not that it's easy, but it's doable.
It's consequential, and you know, there's a part of me that's like, yeah, this chaos in Washington. We fight heroin. We house homeless kids. We help seniors. We take on the region's most pressing problems with intelligence and energy and enthusiasm. Little chaos in Washington. We got this.
You know, thank you for that. Because it's a reality check too. Like, we got this, and you brought up the heroin thing, and it's going to take me right somewhere else, which is a scourge right now that the fentanyl crisis, the fentanyl poisoning. I mean, this isn't, from my perspective, and the people that I talk to about this, these folks are not overdosing. These folks are taking something that they're being poisoned. They're being murdered, right? I don't know if that's too drastic, and you know what? I'm Tommy D. I can say a lot of things. I'm not representing anybody but myself.
Not too drastic if you're at a funeral for a kid.
Thank you.
Then it's not drastic at all.
That's being. You know, I just met a guy recently. He had a podcast on, and I connected with him on LinkedIn, and his brother. I'm going to be meeting with this man on Monday. his brother took an Adderall that he got from a friend, and he died because it was laced with fentanyl. So this is real stuff. These people shouldn't be dying. I don't know why my mind went there first. You said heroin. I said fentanyl. I mean, can we start there? Just what that's.
Yeah, look, the fentanyl poisoning crisis. It's a poisoning, right? So if I get up in the morning and I drink my coffee and it's not actually coffee,
right?
It's rat poison and I die. I didn't overdose on coffee.
No, you didn't have too much. And trust me, I drink a lot of coffee, so I know.
Amen.
Yeah,
I'm with you. So. It's been a huge crisis. It's taken far too many lives. You know, there's a lot of debate now about closing the borders and the supply and that kind of thing. You know, we don't work on the supply side. I wish the supply was a little bit tougher too.
Sure, but it's already here. We're dealing.
It's here, and we work on the demand side, right? Why is there such a demand for every single drug that comes down the pike, right? It was heroin, it was prescription drugs, it was fentanyl, it's now xylazine. There's a drug du jour that comes along every 5 or 10 years, and Americans rush to it. How come?
So that's the question there, right? Like, why are we trying to be numb? Why are we trying? Is it trauma, right? Like, are we trying to? I look back on my own life and decisions I made, you know, when I was a drinker, and I didn't know it at the time, but there was trauma that I had to work through.
It's trauma.
So
it's
I numbed
stress.
it.
Right, it's an inability to get good mental health care. Why do people buy Adderall on the street?
Right.
Buy Adderall on the street.
Well, you shouldn't have to if you get it. If you can get access to it, right?
You should be able to get pharmaceutical grade drugs. You know, one of the things about this is we've got to do a better job of educating young people. We've got to boost up the mental health resources. It's still easier to get fentanyl than it is drug treatment. And until we change that fundamental fact, right? I know enough people where I could text a bunch of people leaving here today and have fentanyl delivered to me in the parking lot. Same doesn't go for drug treatment. If I call for drug treatment,
how long
I'm probably going to be on a list for at least a week, if not 2 weeks.
You need treatment now, and it's going to take you a week to 2 weeks.
Treatment on demand remains pretty elusive, right? You got to have the right insurance coverage. You have to be sick enough. It's still hard to get into treatment. And so as long as it's hard to get into treatment, there's always going to be another drug.
Right.
It gets harder and harder to reduce the demand. You brought up an important point, and I made a habit of talking about this because it's significant. All of our attention is focused on fentanyl. And that's, you know, the way we fight drugs is we go from drug to drug to drug. We're like a fire brigade. Fentanyl's here, break out the troops. Right. In the meantime, there's something else brewing in the background. That something else is alcohol. Alcohol kills twice as many Americans as fentanyl does. It? And we think about the fentanyl fatalities. We're like, oh my God, this is a crisis. Yeah, so is alcohol. We just don't pay attention to it. Yeah. Alcohol will kill you as well. It just takes longer.
So again, I grew up as a bartender, man. I've been drinking since I was 16 years old. If my children are listening, that's not true. But it might have been younger than that. But, you know, when I was 32, I quit drinking, right? And I was a bartender and all that. Why do you think, and it's just an opinion thing, really, but I mean, with your background with LICAD, right? Yeah. Why do you think it gets like, that's the one we're okay with? Like, why did we make that one socially, especially in this country? You know, we prohibited that thing. There was like a whole time, I think they called that prohibition. But like, why does alcohol get the pass on that in our society? And not only the pass, I mean, it's glorified.
It is. There's a culture.
Man, look, we got hammered, man. Oh my God, I was so banged up last night. You have no idea. Forget about it. And you know, it's like celebrating The Hangover and stuff like that. Not just the movie, but like the actual ailment. Why? What's your opinion on that? Why do you think
it's an ever-present thing?
Yeah, it's just there, right?
It's a form of escape. Most people don't see it as being that harmful.
Right.
When you look at it, every legitimate, incredible,
really
public health entity has come out and said this is a toxic substance. Right. And so. It's also just relative to other drugs. I mean, people set up a hierarchy, right? Fentanyl right now is at the top, cocaine probably in there too. You drill down a little bit, you get to cannabis, alcohol, that kind of thing.
And alcohol's like, it's no big deal, you had a couple of drinks. Like, that's the attitude, right? I don't believe that, everybody. I'm just saying, that's the attitude, no big deal.
And most people don't know what problem drinking looks like.
Yeah.
Right? And so people are like, so I have a couple glasses of wine every night? Every night. That's problem drinking, right? And so helping people to understand kind of where, and I think take the judgment out of it, right? Just when you focus on the public health effects and the individual health effects, they're significant. We don't have to exaggerate to people what the impact is. You just need to tell them the facts and tell them the story. I think there's a lot of people that are becoming more aware of this, that don't necessarily have an alcohol use disorder, but are approaching that part of the playing field. And by giving them information, you do enable them to make different choices. Now, there are people who you could give them all the information in the world. Their drinking's likely to continue to accelerate.
That's a part of the population.
Those folks need treatment.
Yeah.
But if you look at the success of Dry January, you look at the success of Sober October, Sober Spring, that kind of thing, there's more awareness about how alcohol impacts you.
And I see a lot of younger people who are not digging it anymore. Now, I'm 47. I don't think I'm old, but like relatively speaking, like some of these young bucks, they don't do what we used to do. They don't rage.
Doesn't happen.
It's not, which I love. And there's so many now, you know, the mocktail craze is it's great. People love that. And being hungover, gang, sucks. Like it's not a great, it's not really great, man. I do remember like that where we'd have to eat a lot of pizza the next day and get the grease to soak up all that. And it was just a never-ending thing. I love the fact that people aren't so much into it anymore. It sucks for the liquor companies and things like that, but you know,
they'll survive.
They'll be all right.
And look, I think industries evolve. You know, I watched what happened with tobacco, right? I watched what's happened with alcohol. I watched what's happened with opioids. I pray it doesn't happen with cannabis. You know, that's another thing we're keeping an eye on. You know, one of the strategic advantages we have in this day and age is I wasn't around to talk to the liquor companies as they were rolling this out and putting together the advertising guidelines and that kind of thing. You know, cannabis is at the early stages, and we've already started to have conversations with some of the retailers, some of the distributors to say, look, you know, I think we have common ground in that nobody wants to see people under the age of 21 using cannabis. No one wants to see folks driving a car when they're high. Nobody wants to see pregnant women using it. How do we create some public health messaging and responsible practices around those very vulnerable populations while still allowing responsible adults who choose to use it to use it?
Right.
And so it's an instructive dialogue. We're doing the same thing with the gaming companies around gambling. Right, that's exploded. We're seeing this more significant number of young men that are being lured into sports betting.
I tell you, man. So I'm a baseball fan, Mets fan. Let's go Mets. And I grew up in the bar scene, right? Like my uncle owned a place in Floral Park, not too far from here. It was called Halligan's, which is a fireman's tool, a Halligan. Yeah. And worked there. It's how I met my wife, and you know, many of my formative years were spent in that bar. But when you're in that environment, there's a lot there. You have the drugs, you have the alcohol, and the gambling. And the fact that my sons watch a game with me, and I have 2 boys and 2 girls, but specifically when I'm watching a game with one of the boys, and DraftKings or one of these companies comes up and is like, hey, $500 deposit, just sign up.
They'll do the bonus matches.
And I got my kid, and again, I'm a guy, I was no prude. I did different things, right? But from the gambling perspective, it is bad news, man. And I know there's a lot of, you know, we got what they're talking about doing by Citi Field, and certainly what in Queens, and what they're talking about doing out here on the island, and everybody says it's a convention center too, and it's not all that. Look, problem gambling is a big issue, and it's an addictive situation, addictive personality. You know, a lot of these things, in my experience, run together. The drugs, the alcohol, 100%. The gambling, it's all like, and it's that piece though where I'm hearing my son tell me, this guy who I'm talking about is 14, that his friends already have an account on the phone where they're gambling.
You get a VPN or a parent opens it for you.
I guess.
You know, one of the things that's damaging for kids, and one of the reasons why you're not supposed to let kids gamble, is because of where they're at in terms of brain development. And so gambling of any form provides you with what we call intermittent reinforcement, right? Slot machine, you know, vision it, you poke it, and eventually you win, right? You could lose 100 times. You win once, you're like, oh, you keep coming back, right? You began chasing losses, you began imagining what it will be like. Sports gambling, sports betting is the same thing. Adults have that frontal lobe a little bit more developed to understand, okay.
And I know many who've destroyed their lives with a developed frontal lobe.
Absolutely. But that's why young people are particularly vulnerable, right? And so that frontal lobe isn't.
You're putting it on the Met game, or you're putting it on the Yankee game. Like it's, and I'm not like a prude like that. Like stop. No, this is wrong. Like there's a problem here. But so I guess you and your organization are informative to.
Yeah, and we're pushing for advertising curbs to say, okay, there's things there right now, and probably won't be given what we've seen. There's no federal agency responsible for overseeing problem gambling programs. right? So for SAMHSA, they oversee drug and alcohol programs, that kind of thing.
Right.
Nobody has any responsibility whatsoever for it. There's no federal agency. And here in New York State, we spend way too little on problem gambling, right?
Yeah.
New York State last year brought in more than $2 billion in sports betting revenues. $6 million went back into problem gambling programs.
$2 billion versus $6 million.
$2 billion versus $6 million, right? And so, look, only 2 to 3% of the population is going to develop a significant problem. There's another 10% that have a mild problem. Those folks require some intervention. And so anytime we move to legalize something, cannabis, gambling, you name it, you got to hedge against the downside and say there's a portion of people that are going to get jammed up.
Those people are in trouble, but the mild people are in trouble too, I tell you. But you know why they're in trouble? Because, let's be honest, where we are here on Long Island, a lot of families are just getting by, right? You throw in a couple grand loss a month in sports betting or at the casino, that's over. You're done now. And then we get into other more challenging situations of I can't pay the mortgage now or something like that.
I can't pay the mortgage. I'm going to, I see an opportunity at my job to take money. I'm going to do that. You're chasing losses, you're selling stuff. I mean, it's a rough environment.
It's pretty brutal.
Once you are in the mix. And so, look, there's a way for everyone to have a good time and still protect those people that might wind up going down the rabbit hole.
How do you, I see so many people come to you and ask you things and you get questions, and I say that from the perspective of I see in the news day a lot and things like that. Do you consider yourself like a thought leader, subject matter, not to go to your head, but I mean like literally like a subject matter expert, like they tap into you when these things related to community and related to life happen, yeah? Yeah,
so the thought leader thing is a little weird, but I've been around long enough, like I'm old enough to have seen like a lot of stuff. And I feel like it's like our staff are helping people individually day to day, and there are times when I get the opportunity to do that. My phone goes 24/7 from people who are like, hey, I got a guy that needs help, that kind of thing. And I welcome those calls. They're really important. They keep me grounded. But I also feel like it's my obligation to talk about these issues, to give life to them. Because I feel like, if I talk to a Newsday reporter and I have a snappy quote and they throw it in there, maybe that's the day that somebody opens the paper and says, you know what, I think maybe I have a problem. Like, there's this guy, maybe I could just call him. And people do, like out of the blue. I don't really know you, but
like you're accessible like that?
Absolutely.
Wow.
And can I talk to you? And so I always do it. And sometimes I'm like, this is a pain. You run the risk of being misquoted. But I'm like, you know what? Somebody may read the paper for the first time and say, you know what, today's the day I'm going to make the call. I'm going to pick up the phone, I'm going to call this guy, or I know someone who might call this guy, or I never heard of FCA. So I do it for that reason. Also just, I want us to be the go-to organization for a lot of these problems. And like it or not, if you're in the paper a lot, people think you're smart. Right? People think you're the authority, right? You do, right? So Jeff's in the paper a lot, he must be, right? If he was an idiot, they wouldn't quote him.
This morning prepping, because I knew we were going to have this conversation today, I have LIBN, it's in my bag. And you're big, not that you have a big face, but the paper made it a big face, because it's a big, that paper. And you got the front page, man. So I think you're smart because of that. So that's... So I think you're smart because I think you're smart, but that helps.
It builds credibility for the organization, right? I'm cognizant of the fact that I've been there 10 years. I won't be there forever. I would love to be there forever. I would love to solve all Long Island's problems and be able to move on and do something else before that. Odds are we won't do that. So in the meantime, I'm like, how can I advance the organization? How can I advance a dialogue about the issues? I like talking about addiction because the more we talk about it, and the more you take it out of the shadows, the more you bust that thing open.
I love that.
It's the greatest way. Look, there's a couple of researchers out there who talk about the opposite of addiction isn't necessarily abstinence, it's connection. And so if we can help people connect around these issues, if we can bring it to life, if we can talk about what addiction looks like and what recovery, more importantly, looks like, I do think people have a picture of addiction. And the way they get their picture of addiction is they likely have some personal experience. And I think I did this in a room with you. I said, how many people of you have personal experience with addiction? And almost every hand went up. And I said, for how many of you was that a really positive experience? And nobody raised their hands. People are like, no, it was a horror show.
No, it was terrible.
And then the other way we get our information about addiction is we read the paper and we read about the guy that jacked up 7 7-Elevens because he had a heroin problem. That's how we form our attitudes about addiction, unless you humanize it. Unless you say, this happens to a lot of folks, like 1 in 4. And so I think, it's part of my obligation and responsibility as a CEO, to look after my staff, yes, to help individual clients, but also to raise the profile of the issues and talk about them.
Yeah, raise the profile of the issues. And that's the one too, when you think about homelessness, right, I feel like some people who don't have that paradigm and have never had that experience, and I don't mean what I'm going to say, but this is sometimes what people, that person is lazy, go get a job, fix yourself
we assign
up,
blame.
right? Come on now, get it together, man. And I feel like, with addiction, there's always been that word. And again, gang, I don't mean this, I'm just saying it, junkie and things like that. Not somebody who had a traumatic experience and found something that made him feel better.
You made a series of bad choices.
Right. Yeah, no, or maybe bad things happened to me and I wanted to not feel anymore. Maybe that was what it was, right? Like, but that's what I think kind of, normalizing it or educating people to just say like, no, maybe somebody had a rough run at this thing called life or got exposed to something at a young age and all of a sudden now has this problem and the body depends on it. I mean, it's raising children right now in this era, I mean, it's scary. I mean, like you and I have had other conversation about this, and when a child is lost and a child is lost to addiction or tragically, I mean, we hear our young people, especially young girls, taking their lives more than had happened historically. You don't come back from these things.
That's right.
And I think if there's ways we can put ourselves in that other person's experience and try to just know, and that's how we become aware and that's how we help. That's connection to me.
It is. You know what blame does for us? When we blame the guy who's homeless and say he's lazy, when we blame...
Well, I don't have to do anything then, right? Because I don't have to help him because it's his fault.
Well, you don't have to help him, but it also explains it away. It says, this could never happen to me because I wouldn't do those same things, right? I wouldn't go use drugs, and so I don't have to worry. I would always have a job, and so I'll never be homeless. It insulates us from the problem. Right,
so it makes us, so we don't have to think about it anymore.
We don't have to think about it. We can say it won't ever happen to us, and we don't necessarily have to help because, well, they made their own choices.
Right. This must be what that guy wants.
It's very, very functional, right? And so when we think about reducing stigma,
it's a very practical way to be able to
deal with some of those things.
Yeah, right. We got to get our hands dirty. We got to get into it. Yeah.
Some of that is, I think, just a survival mechanism kicks in.
Sure.
Right. If only you hadn't. Right, therefore it can't happen to me because I would never do those things.
I wouldn't do that. So that's easy for me. Then I could check the box. I could keep move on with my life. That's the thing to me. Like, and I guess in a lot of ways I'm naive, and I don't know if that's the right way to say it. But like, what blows my mind is that we allow people to not have access to food and shelter. And allow is the wrong word maybe, but that we allow there to be a situation where people don't have food and shelter. Now, we have friends in this work that sometimes their staff will reach out and somebody's like, I'm not ready to come in. I don't want to come in, right?
Yep.
But that we wouldn't try our hardest to, what kills me, man, is this one. You and I might be having a meal somewhere, right? And we're having a burger, right? Maybe the guy over here is having a $150 Kobe steak, right? And 100 yards away, somebody's eating out of a dumpster. Here, on this island, or on that island, Manhattan Island. What are we doing, man? Like, I can't even begin to understand why now that's Madison Avenue in some ways I complain about. It's consumerism. It's people, I got to go get more stuff because I need more stuff, because I need more stuff, right? What are your thoughts on just like how we, as a society, even allow that?
The fact that basics aren't available to everybody, particularly in a place like Long Island, right? So Long Island is a place that is heavily divided and heavily fragmented, and here we have communities that they have a high school graduation rate of 99.9%, and they've had that since the late 1800s. You have other districts that have been as low as 60%, and now we're approaching 70%, 75%, and so this has always been a land of inequality and of real disparities. There are places where those disparities have real life-changing consequences in healthcare, in mental health care, in food, in shelter. I saw, and I've shared openly for very specific reasons, the fact that I'm a 2-time cancer survivor. I'm white, middle class, heterosexual, well insured, all those things. I survived it. There's a lot of folks who could have had exactly the same disease profile, but fewer resources, who would not have survived what I did.
And not so different geography, you're saying, like here on this island you're talking about. Yeah.
Right here on this island, right in the medical center where I got care. Right. You know, there was one day I'm getting ready to leave, and I went in for radiation every day, first thing in the morning, was in my office by 7:30 after having radiation. Oof. And one day I'm leaving, and there's a much older woman with a walker. And pretty unsteady, and it was November, and the wind is blowing the door in the foyer. And I said to her on the way out, I'm like, "You okay?" Yeah. And she said, yeah, my son is going to get me, but I hope he shows up this time. And I said, is it possible he's not going to show up? And she said, well, you never know with him, you know these kids. And I said, do you have a different way? And she said, well, I guess I'll take the bus.
Oh, God.
And I stood there for a split second deciding, well, what do I offer her money, or is that patronizing? Yeah. Like, what do I do here? You know, I went back and had a conversation with the nurses, pretended I was talking about something else, and said, look, does she have a way? Can you like? And they're like, no, we will call Uber or Lyft. We will help get her home. But I'm like, I'm jetting off to my office in Garden City after radiation. She's probably got a 2-hour bus trip in front of her, and will only do that day in and day out until she can't anymore.
Social determinants of health.
Yeah, and so, you know, anytime I have the opportunity to talk, and it's really from a place of privilege to talk about these issues, I do. You know, I've shared with you early on in my career, I worked in the field of HIV, and people are like, do you have AIDS? Are you gay? I'm like, I'm neither of those things, but I'm outraged watching people die while nobody does anything about it. And I think the more we can speak out, particularly as white guys, about racism, about sexism, about homophobia, and that kind of thing, that's how you make change. Yeah. That's where people look and say, oh, why would he care about sex crimes? Why would he care about gender bias in the workplace?
Because we're people. That's why.
That's
like,
exactly
what are we talking about, right?
And I think, you know, but I think part of this, particularly with men, is making it okay to fight for these things, to talk about these things, to set the bar the right way and set an example for our kids, for our young men. And that's how you change entire cultures. And so I view my role at FCA as being absolutely critical, but my role as a human being is actually more important.
There's so much here, man. We can go for days on this type of stuff, and I'm appreciative that, you know, you got to get a little uncomfortable to make these moves. You have to get out there and make it happen. I'm feeling drawn to ask you, like, I'll see things like on a Saturday or Sunday, I started to say earlier, like, you know, Thrive had a walk, or this had, and now you say how people can access you. You know, you ever stop, man? Like, not to be funny, but like, do you, because like, I know you run an organization, you mentioned, you know, you're in the office at 7:30 in the morning after radiation, so I know you're putting in the time, but I see you on the weekends doing stuff too. So talk to me about when you get your downtime.
It's a balancing act, and I would say work-life balance isn't this thing where it's day by day or even week for week. Like I go through periods of my life where I'm working like a madman, and then I go through periods of my life where I'm like, I need to kind of reset and take more time. You know, I'm really focused in on my health, because without that, like, nothing else matters.
Sure. Big on the fitness, right?
Yeah, so big on the fitness, really. So for me, the fitness piece is health. It's mental health. It's that time away. Very often I run and I don't bring music. I don't bring my phone. If I was kidnapped, it would take my wife 6 months to find out.
You just run miles? Like, are you one of those, like,
So I had to get back up after treatment and that kind of thing. But yes, I will go out for a long time. I'll do the same thing on the bike. I swim. Swimming is great because there is no phone, there's no earphones, like by design, right? So you don't have to make a choice, right? It takes the choice away. And so that's really critical. And one of the things I found about myself is that you get a dopamine rush when you run.
I've heard.
And when you stop, it's like withdrawal from any other drug.
It's just like that. You want to go back for that fix.
So if I skip a day, right, it's not a good day. This morning I had, you know, besides doing this, I had an all-staff meeting. I have a thing tonight at Thrive.
So you haven't run?
I did run.
Oh, you did?
I made sure that I got up.
It wouldn't have been good if you did.
Right. I got up at that 5 a.m. club and made sure that I was right. Wow. That I got the gym time in, then I got the running time in, and then I started my day in exactly the right way.
Because it would be a different path if you didn't.
Yeah, like then you're at 10 o'clock saying, oh, how do I do it now? Right? And so I feel like I have to do that. I am probably not as good as protecting my time and sanity as I need to be. But again, I think work-life balance is something that goes over the course of time. I also don't consider much of what I do to be work. It's not work. Going to a Thrive event on a Saturday is not work.
Right.
It fills me up. It's like what keeps me going. It brings me joy to see so many people celebrating their own recovery and success.
That is so important to say it and see it that way. We're running out of time, so you're gonna have to come back if you, you know, because there's so much more to talk about. But where your cup is being filled by being with the people that you work with is a game changer. It's not work. Gang, that's what it is. I mean, thank you for being here, by the way.
My pleasure.
I appreciate you, man.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. That's what it is, gang. It's not work. They always say, you know, do something you love, you never work a day in your life, but change other people's lives and you never work a day in your life. Thank you so much, Dr. Jeff Reynolds, FCA. I'm Tommy D. This show is called Long Island ChangeMakers. We're going to leave it there. This has been another In Focus production. See you later. Bye.